Prologue by Taylor Redmond. Just a quick note before I get into this story. This is a prologue for a new book that author Taylor Redmond has asked me to read. You would have heard other stories of his on this channel, like Cinderella, Joy, and Apathy's Storm. So if you like those stories and you like the prologue here, keep an eye out for his book and I'll make sure to share it on this channel once it is released. I know I'll be picking up a copy, and if you like to support the author's work and would like to see where the rest of this story goes, make sure you grab yourself a copy as well. Alright, on to the story. You've yet to be born. The thundering words boomed in David's head, jolting him awake. He lay on the rough carpeted hallway floor, squinting up at the blinding gleam of the fluorescent lighting above him. Instead of the usual glow, the light streaked away from its bulb in a stream. Wind rushed over him, the roaring filled his ears. Papers fluttered over him, all shooting in the same direction as the threads of incandescence. Panic flushed across his chest as he realized his body slowly dragged along the carpet. He scrambled upright, the whipping gale almost folding him over as he did. Ahead of him lay the disaster he helped create. No, this can't be. We did all the calculations. They were all correct. You weren't supposed to come out yet. But his eyes spoke the actual truth of the matter. Before him, at the end of the hallway, stood two red double doors. A sign hung affixed, reading, European Council for Nuclear Research. Cleared experiment Babel personnel only. The open doors stood as the harbingers of man's arrogance, his precious research scattered through the air, drawn to the experiment room. Within a couple of feet of the entrance, the leaflets of parchment dissolved into rivers of ash that poured themselves into the cavernous entrance. David squinted into the Babel room, heart hammering in his chest. The interior was obscured in a rippling light, emblazoned in a kaleidoscope of colours across the spectrum. The shades of luminescence swirled in a hypnotic pattern just as a small black sphere burst from the centre. The singularity. David gulped. He had awakened. As David watched in horror, a brand of agony pierced his back before exploding out the front of his shoulder. He gasped, rolling over to his side. He barely glimpsed a streak of light speeding to the doors. The glowing luminescence burned, tinged with his blood, before it pierced right through the threshold, scattering into particles. Warm blood gushed out of David's frail shoulder. He clasped his hand over it to staunch the bleeding as he stood up. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. His ramblings were cut off by the destruction of rationality before him. The spear of light that had shot through David sprouted from the singularity. The thread coursed David's blood, turning it a burning crimson. It lengthened, spawning dozens upon dozens of other threads. They wove themselves into a mass that grew 5 curled appendages. David took a step back, mouth agape. Your hand, it's beautiful. The hand unfurled itself, revealing a bloody palm devoid of skin and flesh. It grew in size until its fingertips grazed the ceiling. The ceiling burst into particles at his touch, flowing into his grasp. I have so many questions for you, David whispered. I have but one for you. May I hold you? The giant, pulsating hand stretched forward. The entire hall ground into ash in its wake, ripped into his essence. Nothing remained behind him, only the dark. David took a step forward, lifting his own shaking hand. The skin peeled off his forearm like a glove and ripped off his fingertips, drawn into the void. David had but an instant to glance down at his mangled arm before the flesh squelched into paste, oozing onto the carpet. David screamed in agony, springing back and clutching the remaining stump of his limb. "No, not like this. We were to be equals." Despair coursed through his body as he realized the Tower of Babel fell to protect man from God. He turned on his heel and sprinted away. Deep gouges caved on the wall beside him, chunks tearing off. The floor below him crumbled at his heels. Terror clutched David's spine as he whipped his head around. His hand stretched out from the doors, consuming all in his path. Why does man run from what he desired? You left home to find me. Do I not satisfy? The skin on David's back tingled and pulled back. His entire front tightened, stretching almost as if he would tear right through his own skin. As David gasped into the reception room, he whipped around. "No, I don't want you." His hand slammed down onto the rest of the hallway, fingertips grazing the edges of the welcome room. David's heart hammered in his throat as he watched his hand ball into a fist and retreat back into the doorway. "Do as you will. It saddens me to see you all alone. Your home was beautiful." The appendage rocketed back into the singularity. The double doors slammed shut, leaving them suspended in eternity. The literal concept of nothing itself engulfed the Babel room in a cavernous embrace. David peered over the side of the reception room. The void stared back, the absence of light somehow darker than the concept itself. He sprang away as if he'd be consumed by it. David glanced down and reached. The skeletal remains of his forearm had fallen off at the elbow and onto the ground. Blood drizzled from his stump. His head rushed as he yanked a lab coat off a rack near the wall. He wrapped the length of it over the stump and yanked it tight with his mouth. The bleeding slowed to a halt. The doctor's mind burned as he tried to calculate the damages. Those pesky what-ifs he and his team had so arrogantly tossed aside. The impossible had happened. What were the consequences? A man-made phenomenon of this size and magnitude had never occurred in the universe before. He took comfort in the solid ground. Maybe this was the extent of their punishment for breaking the laws of nature, for spitting in God's face. He estimated the destroyed hallway to be 5 meters long. 5 meters of the planet sacrificed in the pursuit of knowledge. Still, it couldn't have been much worse, he rationalized. He'd have to be more careful in the next experiment. He glanced around the reception room. It acted as a hub with 4 connecting hallways. The corridor behind David had surrendered itself to the void. The path in front led to the exit behind glass double doors. To the left were the washrooms, and to the right, the research wing where his office lay. Above him on the wall, the acronym CERN remained embedded. He picked up a stapler from the desk surface, wincing in pain. Taking care not to wave his hand over the threshold, he tossed it out to where the hall once stood. It travelled in a normal arc at first. The moment it passed out of the reception room, the stapler sped up in a straight line, disintegrating along the way. "Jacques? Stephen? Juliet?" David called out for his team, his fellow conspirators in the crimes against humanity. His voice reverberated across the abandoned room with no response. "Anybody?" he cried aloud, only receiving his panicked echoes in kind. Flutters of fear spread within him once more. He stumbled to the exit in a frenzy. Blood seeped from his stump, dripping onto the floor behind him, but he didn't care. His eyes clung to the light gleaming through the double doors. Everything's going to be fine. Everything has to be fine. He hobbled the last steps to the exit hallway, scrambling for breath as he braced his aged frame against the wall. The shafts of warm sunlight acted as a tonic for his frazzled nerves. The light was visible proof everything was fine, that he was justified in his actions, that contacting him proved mortals could stand as equals. David finally made his way to the glass exit doors, leaning his weary body against them. His breath condensed the glass in a fog. He hurriedly wiped the moisture away with his sleeve and shot a concerned peek outside. Thank God, he sighed in relief. Everything appeared normal, the exact way he'd last remembered. The street in front of the building bustled with life. He couldn't revel in the sounds, but took respite at the sights. The black sedan cruising down the street, the young mother grabbing her child on the sidewalk, a flock of birds flying overhead. The black sedan cruising down the street, the young mother grabbing her child on the sidewalk, a flock of birds flying overhead. The black sedan cruising down the... David's eyes widened as he stared in horror. No, 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 no. He chanted the spell as if it would change his reality. This can't be. How far out did this spread? The entire city block? David repressed a shudder at the thought. Trembling, he grasped the door handle, drawing in shallow, shaking breaths. A sudden crack caused him to jump, tumbling onto his back. He craned his head to gaze out of the glass. Someone new appeared from the infinitely looping scene before him. A young woman strode directly to the glass doors. She appeared to be from Southeast Asia, her skin the colour of acacia, a mouth contorted in a smile slightly too large for her head, and proud cheekbones surrounding a button nose. She walked with a merry gait, almost skipping to the glass double doors. He scooted back as she opened the door and stepped inside. David gawked at the woman. Was she real? He stretched out a blood-stained hand and touched his fingertips to her ankle. His fingers relished the warmth of her skin. She was real. The woman gazed down at him and jerked her ankle away from his grasp. Her smile persisted, though. Whoa, she jeered in a raucous voice. Simmer down, Sparky. You gotta treat a lady to a modestly priced fast food meal first before you get to touching, old man. David gaped at her. Without a further word, she jaunted across the hallway towards the reception room, towards the entrance to the void. David clawed his body back to his feet. Hey, wait, young lady. She ignored him, crossing right to the lip of the last bit of solid ground. David frantically hobbled his way down the entrance hallway, pausing at the threshold of the reception room. You can't go in there. It's... His voice trailed off, unsure how to explain. She looked back at him, still walking to the void. Huh? Her foot passed over the threshold. No, David cried, but the unknown whisked her into its clutches. David ran a blood-stained hand through his greying hair in shock as she flew through the vacuum towards the red double doors. Her body seemed to flow in gracious curves through the entropy. The dance severed along with her spine as her body folded in half, backwards at the navel, as if jerked by an invisible hook. She only emitted a brief gurgling as her windpipe collapsed. With a horrific squelching, her torso tore apart, releasing a spool of intestines. Her eyes stared unblinking back into his own before she turned completely inside out. What had been a young woman a second ago now morphed into a coalesced stream of viscera. The blended remains of blood, bone and organs funneled itself into a fleshy thread and flung itself at the doors. David closed his eyes, but his ears painted the picture for him when it splattered noisily against the doors. Acidic bile filled his throat, ejecting from his mouth in a thick stream. He stumbled his way to the bathrooms on the right wing hallway. Crashing through the bathroom doors, he heaved himself on the sink, reaching all the way. The sight and sound of her body shredding would forever imprint themselves in his mind. His heart nearly stopped when a sharp knock emitted from the bathroom door.
Damn, that shit was rougher than I thought. Definitely like the second most intense way I've had my guts rearranged today. Hey, can I come in, or are you going to be all weird? I promise I won't look at your little mad scientist, okay?
The same woman's voice, albeit muffled, rang through the door. In numb shock, David slowly turned around and pulled open the bathroom door. In front of him, the young woman stood, very much alive and intact. She wore a green tank top and jeans that were both splattered with blood. She eyed him up and down, placing something in her back pocket. Sorry about all that. Name's Bella. I just came here to grab something from the lovely apocalyptic room, but we can have a little chat. You want to talk in here or somewhere more dignified? I mean, I ain't got no dignity, but you look somewhat classy, what with your fancy lab coat and all. She finished, looking him over. David let his arm fall to his side. How are you here? I saw... He almost reached again. Belle waved her hand dismissively. Oh, that little old thing. Psh, after a couple of 100 times, dying doesn't do much for you. We need to talk. I'm sure you have questions. David pointed towards the research wing, mumbling. My office is that way. I'm David, by the way. Awesome. Lead the way, Dexter. She stood aside, looking at him expectantly. David stepped forward, almost collapsing from the pain. He gasped out, leaning against the door frame. Bella glowered down at him somewhat impatiently. You know, when I imagined meeting the guy who destroyed the continent, I didn't imagine a doddering old fool. Hold on, let me get you something. David's blood froze in his veins. Continent? Bella didn't answer, instead rummaging around behind the reception desk. She grasped a rolling computer chair and wheeled it over to David. Here, hop on. David hopped over and collapsed onto the chair. Continent? He wrestled with that word, that one single word, as she wheeled him across the reception room. It wasn't possible. She had to be lying. He'd just seen people right outside a couple of seconds. His train of thought halted abruptly. Time. Gravity. Oh, God. His office resided on the first door to the left. Bella kicked open the door and trundled him inside, parking him at his large mahogany desk. She walked around to the other side of the desk, where he usually sat, plopped herself down and kicked her feet up on top, casting him a sharp stare. Averting his eyes, David withheld his most pressing question. He wasn't ready yet. Instead, he asked, Where is everyone? Bella placed her hands behind her head, glancing up at the ceiling. Let's see. Each time I come here, I meet someone different. There was a Juliet, a Charles, and a Jacques. From what they've told me, it has something to do with relativity or something. What matters is that they've received their judgment. She glared at him. Yours is next. His justifications withered in her wrath. He deserved it. David gazed at the calendar on his desk. It read July 2023. Gulping, he asked the question he didn't want the answer to. What year is it out there? Bella placed a finger to her lips. Oh, we're over halfway through 2024 now. David huddled over, supporting his head with his hands. Oh, God. Time dilation. No, more like the end of time as a dimension. He glanced over to a note pinned under Bella's feet. The text on his sticky pad had served as his mantra for the past decade. What lay beyond time? What lay beyond space? Ironically, he had his answer and had dragged the world along into it. Lifting his head up, she still stared at him. All traces of joy faded from her face. Her eyes burned with a cold fury, reciprocated by her scowl. he rasped out. I don't know how to begin to explain what we did, but everything we did... Shut the fuck up. Her bitter tone froze his words. I already know what you did. You've destroyed the continent. Your little Babel experiment plunged the rest of the world into a hell that they don't realise they're in yet. I came here to pick something up, but while I'm here... She withdrew her feet off the table and slammed her palms on the desk. I might as well ask you what I asked the others. Why? The world? How do you know? She smirked. He told me through the dreams. You know, him. Her eyes widened, emphasizing the word. Him? You've met? She leaned over closer, whispering, Oh yes, I've met him. He's seen fit to give Earth a choice through a few select people. I'm one of them, and I'm going to make the choice. Choice? She nodded. Yes, we select few get the power to choose through our fears. You saw a taste of his power. I really did die back there, yet here I am. That's the gift he gave me. I can't die. Her eyes narrowed at him. No matter how much I want to. Our fears are the gateway to his gifts. He recoiled from the intensity of a glower. Suddenly, her face lit back up, cracking into a wide smile. But it ain't all bad, you know. Coming back to life has its perks. For example, I have this choking kink, and, oh my god, do you have any idea how hard I can choke myself now? Oh man, when I time it just right with the moment of death. She bit her lip and released a shuddered breath before leaning back. Oh yeah, back on topic. Why'd you do it? David gawked at her. I just wanted to see, to know. She nodded with a comforting smile. You know, I almost can't blame you. Tell you what, I can show you. She grinned at his stump, a less painful way at that. He brought his trembling gaze up to her eyes. There's another way? She leaned forward towards him, eyes gleaming. Mm-hmm. You still won't come back, but you already knew that. He nodded. He knew, as he always did. Please. She stood up from the desk and grabbed the back of his chair. Your wish is my command. She wheeled him out of his office, through the reception room, and out the exit hallway. David's breaths grew shallow in trepidation as he glanced at the sunlight. The light was a lie. He'd finally know the truth. She kicked open the door and pushed him outside. She brought him to a halt a couple of feet outside the research complex. Okay, this is the horizon. You can get off here. The looping scene around him kept playing on. She'd wheeled him right in front of the mother, endlessly picking up her child. He studied the face of the little girl. Her face started off with a joyous expression directed at her mother, mouth open with mirth. But then her smile faded. Her eyes widened in abject terror at something in the sky, her mouth now open to scream. Then it looped back to her original joyous expression. He stepped off the chair, his remorse dissipating. It was all worth it. His back seared in pain as something hard pierced through it. He gurgled out blood, collapsing to his knees. The object tore out in front of him with a faint sucking. Bella walked back into sight, wiping blood off of a pocket knife. She gazed down at him pitilessly. He couldn't speak, only able to stare. She smiled at him. Ma'am, I can't tell you just how good that felt. Now, the first death sucks, but I will be right there with you, okay? I'll even sing to you. He babbled incoherently, watching her stride behind him, the cold tip of a knife pressed against his neck as she hummed in his ear. He's got the whole world In his hands he's got the whole wide world. The knife dragged across his throat in a torturous line of pain. He gasped for air, not from terror, but from ecstasy, for the truth revealed itself to him. The looping scene vanished before him without a trace, laying bare the sins of man. The once peaceful, bustling street replaced itself with a barren, destroyed landscape. The land lay strewn and mangled before him. Jagged spires of earth rose endlessly into the sky in all directions and curved their earthen tendrils, their points all converging at the CERN building. Bella finished her song. Take a look at your destruction, Doc. For hundreds of miles, the lands ripped themselves apart in a mad dash to join the singularity. I've taken to calling it the Lotus. It's beautiful in its own way, but it can't compare to him. Bella lightly grasped either side of his head and turned it to the sublime sphere, humming her tune. The sky was a lie, a splendid lie. Impenetrable darkness stretched across the heavens, bearing no harbour to any stars or celestial bodies. Then they finally locked gazes. It was him. His eyes, his inhuman eyes, escaped comprehension. Each eye rested against the sky, larger than the moon, and shone in a captivating luminescence. In them encompassed the whispered secrets of the universe. He loomed tremendously, enclosing the heavens themselves. The very atmosphere rippled in his breaths. David smiled, arms outstretched above him to receive his judgment. I just want to thank Taylor Redmond for allowing me to narrate that story. As a reminder, that's a prologue for a novel that he's writing, and I'll make sure that I share the link to that novel once it's released. If you liked what you heard here, let the author know in the comments below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.